Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. A little different setup tonight, so if there's any issues with audio or visual or anything like that, please let me know and we will try to take care of it. Hopefully, this works and hopefully works in the future. Um, let's get started. Of course, this class is dedicated to all the Jewish people, wherever they may be, especially those in the land of Israel. And it is also dedicated in the merit of Asher ben Esther and Matan ben Esther. They should have all the brachas for everything that they need and give their parents, Mashnachas, and for the entire Jewish people. If you would like to sponsor a class, sponsorships are available. You can send us a message, send us put a comment or a message, and we would be happy to facilitate that. It helps us keep these classes going. Okay, let's get started. This week's Torah portion is Parsha's Lech Lecha, which talks about Avraham Avinu, Abraham, our forefather, and his trials and tribulations in the beginning of his story. So let's get started. So one thing we're going to focus on tonight is in Genesis chapter 16. Avraham has a conversation with God as follows. After the words of Avraham, God's word came to Avraham in a vision, saying, "Do not fear punishment, Avraham. I am a shield for you. Furthermore, your reward will still be very great." Avraham said, "God, of what benefit would anything you give me, seeing that I am childless and I have no son, and the steward of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?" That is the conversation. A very bizarre kind of a conversation. First of all, what does the fact that Eliezer works for him, what does have to do with anything? The fact that he doesn't have children, what does it matter? That what about blessings? Are you going to say no to blessing because you don't have children? So let's see. Let's break down a little bit. What is the response, and then we will kind of go through what this is all talking about. Okay, so Avram continues, and he says, "Look, you have given me no children. Eliezer, a mere member of my household, will inherit me." And then he continues, "At that moment, the word of God came to him, saying, 'This person will not be your heir. Rather, one born from your own flesh will inherit you.' God took Avraham outside his tent, and he told him, 'Look towards the heavens and count the stars, if you could count them.' He said, 'That will be how numerous your descendants will be.' Avraham believed in God and counted it as a great act of righteousness." Right? So Avraham is given credit for trusting in God, and that he is in fact going to have children, and he's going to have any children as there are stars in the sky. Okay. So the first thing is that when he has this conversation, he mentions Eliezer as the person who's going to inherit him. So the first thing is, if you're going to say, like, listen, my only heir is Eliezer, why would you say things that you would probably say, this guy Eliezer he's a piece of work, I don't like him, or whatever, he's a good employee, or what does he do for me already, right? But instead, he praises him. How so? So the Talmud tells us that the reason he's called Eliezer of Damascus is that he pursued the four kings to Damascus. So let's talk about that. In this week's Torah portion, there was a World War Zero, I guess. It was the four kings versus the five kings, and the four kings overtook the five kings and captured Abraham's nephew Lot. And he only had 318 fighters with him, Avraham, and he had to rescue his nephew. However, that's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that Avraham had one fighter. It was Eliezer, and nonetheless, he defeated the kings and he pushed them all the way to Damascus. That's pretty incredible feat. So, but still, Avraham is saying it not as a good thing. He's saying that my main man, the guy who everything happens in my house happens to Eliezer, he's the guy who pushed everybody to Damascus. Again, if you're going to try to say, listen, I need an heir, you would probably put down the person who is your potential heir at this point. But that's not what he does. Then the Talmud further tells us that actually, what is Damasek, which means Eliezer of Damascus? Damasek actually is an acronym for Shedoila Umashka, that he drew and he gave to drink, which refers to the fact that he was the one who drew from Abraham's teachings of monotheism and Torah, and he gave it to everybody. In other words, he was the one who was promoting Abraham's mission and vision of the world. And in fact, to the point where the Talmud tells us that he was a yeshiva student, Eliezer, and not only that, the Talmud tells us in, not the Talmud, sorry, the Medrash tells us in Derech Eretz Zuta, it says that 9 people entered paradise alive. And who are those? Chanoch, the son of Yered, Elijah the prophet, Mashiach, Eliezer the servant of Abraham, Hiram the king of Sur, the servant who saved Jeremiah from the pit, Yavetz, Batia the daughter of Paro, Sarah the daughter of Asher, and some include Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So again, you have all these people who are listed as entering paradise alive, which essentially means the reason why people have to die is, as we know, death was brought to the world because people were imperfect, and therefore they had, since there is a portion of evil in every single body, in some way of negativity, that has to die, and the soul lives forever. But the body has some sort of evil in it since the sin of the eating from the tree of knowledge, since that there is that lingering of negativity. It has to die, it has to rot, the body. But these people, essentially, what they accomplish, Elijah the prophet being the most famous of them, is the description of that is in Tanakh, is these people achieved perfection in not only in their soul but in their body. So therefore, they didn't have to die; they were able to go to heaven alive. So Eliezer is counted amongst those people. That's amazing. You're gonna say you have an heir. Why would you say, listen, oh, my heir? This guy he's one of the greatest top 10 people of all time. Pretty amazing. Not only that, we said that he was the one who was teaching all his students. In other words, he had not only how amazing Eliezer was as an individual level, but he was going to promote Abraham's legacy of monotheism, of Torah. He was going to continue promoting that. And he was Abraham's, it says that everything happened through Abraham. He was Abraham's COO. He was the one who ran the guest house where Abraham had the first Chabad house in the history of the world, right? People come for food and they stay for the spirituality. That was all Abraham. And we see however we see there are different types of people who have different types of ambitions. So let's get into legacy. And what is the legacy that people try to leave? So everybody wants to see success in their life. Everybody wants to leave some sort of legacy. So some people are driven by, let's say, conquest. Literally, some people want to conquer the world. Some people want to they want to master their craft. They want to spread their teachings or ideas. And it seems that these are all people who they're trying to expanding their business, right? Whatever it may be, they're trying to promote something and keep that going and be successful in that. And that's what they see as important. However, it's not, people aren't content in just accomplishment. They want their accomplishment to be preserved. They want the preservation of their accomplishment. And Avraham said that even though Eliezer was this amazing person who was going to preserve the true preservation of Abraham's legacy was only going to be through children. Only going to be through not just spiritual children, but physical children. That would be the true legacy. It's today in the news. There's a lot of discussion about legacy. Apparently, the President of the United States is trying to leave a legacy by building something in the White House. The former President Obama just spent $800 million on a presidential library. People want to leave legacies. However, the true legacy is not through just keeping your ideas. There has to be some sort of children are true legacy. And in fact, what happened to all of Eliezer's students? They're gone. They're not here today. Only Abraham's descendants, the Jewish people, those are the people who lasted. So we see that the great reward that Abraham was given was that he would have, and God told him he's going to have children. Now, and that's why we see how important Jewish education is. Jewish education is one of the most important things that that the Jewish people do. In fact, we say Shema, we say twice a day. We say in the morning, we say in the evening, we say Shema. And what is one of the highlights and one of the most important things of Shema? It says, V'shinanta levanacha, and you shall teach this to your children. We also have the Shema prayers on the doorpost of every Jewish home. It is also in your tefillin that Jewish men wear every day. And all these things are, every single one of these things, it says, you have education, Jewish education, Jewish education. It has to be reinforced how important Jewish education is. And we see also when it comes to Jewish education specifically, but really anything that you want lasting. When Avraham made the covenant of between the parts in chapter 15, God says to take these different animals, split them in half, and he walks through them, and Avraham said to God as follows. This is chapter 15, verse 9. He says, right? Take for me a 3 calves, 3 goats, 3 rams, a turtle dove, and a young dove. And Rashi explains, he said, what does it mean? Rashi explains, what does it mean that Avraham had this experience of this covenant between the parts? What was important about that? Rashi says, he said, Avraham wanted to ask God, how will I know that my descendants will continue to remain in the land of Israel? In other words, how am I going to ensure my legacy? How am I going to ensure my children follow on my path? And God said, it's through sacrifices, the sacrifices that the Jewish people make. And for us, the most important thing that we need to know is that sacrifice, self-sacrifice, sacrifice of our own ambitions, sacrifice of our own wants and needs, and our own maybe our own personal things that we want, putting those aside for Jewish education. That is what will fuel the next generation. That is what is going to continue our legacy. So when we talk about legacy building and Jewish education, we have to, yes, it's expensive to send your kids to Jewish school. It's hard to sometimes include your children in synagogue, or drive them to a Jewish lesson, or whatever it may be, whatever the difficulties of Jewish education are. We all know how difficult it is to educate children, not just Jewishly, but in general, to be parents or grandparents. But how much more so when it comes to Jewish education? There is a lot of difficulties. No one's saying that it's easy, but that itself, the sacrifice that we put, and the things we put into, that's the things that's going to create a true legacy. That is the thing that is going to continue our ideas, and what are our ideas? We're talking about the Jewish faith. We're talking about how we're going to continue having Jewish people. The answer is through Jewish education. That is the only way. That is the true way, and that is the everlasting way, and that is what Avraham taught us. I'll just finish with a story. There was a chassid, his name was Rabbi Zalman Gurari from the previous generation. He had a very interesting story. Not to get into his whole life story, but basically he knew the Chabad Rebbes from a very, very young age. He grew up around the Chabad Rebbes in the Chabad court, all the way back in Russia. And at some point when he was living in America, he was involved in business, and that's how he made a living. And one of his relatives was Rabbi Shmayo Gurari, a distant relative. However, Rabbi Shmayo Gurari was the Rebbe's brother-in-law, and he was also in charge of the director of the Chabad Yeshiva system in America, and the Central Chabad Yeshiva system, and therefore he was very involved in fundraising. One time he told his cousin, he said, listen, I'm going to Brazil. I know you have business contacts in Brazil, you have different deals. Can you please come with me on this business trip to meet with certain donors, and you'll be able to open some doors for me, and hopefully I'll have a successful trip. This is in the 1950s, 60s, whatever it was. And he told Rabbi Gurari, listen, his relative, he said, listen, if you could arrange for me that at the end of the trip, I don't want to get a commission or anything, I just want to be able to have a private audience with the Rebbe, and I want to be able to ask for whatever I want. So he said, okay, I'll arrange it. Sure enough, they had an amazing trip. They raised way more money than they could have ever imagined. And okay, he gets back to the United States, and he tells Rabbi Shmuel Gerari, also known as the Rashag in Chabad circles. He says, "Can you please arrange this audience?" Sure enough, he has a yechidus, an audience with the Rebbe, a personal audience, and he says to the Rebbe, he starts to tell him a story. He says, "Listen, I had this business deal. We all this product I purchased, and it went on a boat, and the boat sank." And he starts to give the Rebbe his whole sob story, and he's about to ask the Rebbe for a bracha for his business, that he was in a financial bind, and he's asking the Rebbe that it should, be smoothed out over. And the Rebbe interrupts him while he's starting his sob story. And the Rebbe says, when a person has an opportunity to ask for something good, has an opportunity to ask for a blessing, he should ask for something important. And he realized right away, and the Rebbe said, you should ask for that your children should be chassidim. Your children should also follow in your ways. And he said, okay, that's what I want. And he got that blessing. And indeed, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren today are all following in his path. So we see how sometimes we lose focus a little bit. We get distracted by the world and money and the almighty dollar, or whatever other distractions that go on in our lives. At the end of the day, the only true legacy that we have, it's not big buildings, it's not expanding the White House, it's not presidential libraries. It's, will our children follow in our ways? That is the only legacy that we truly can leave. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Wishing you a wonderful Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.